Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Hopkins-Utter indicated that he wanted to ask a re-examination question of these witnesses. There is no right of re-examination for Mr. Hopkins-Utter, given that these are not his witnesses. He's talked to me about what the question is, and I'm not agreeing that he should be asking this question in re-examination. It's not appropriate in my view. So I've told him that he needs to make a submission to you on that point.
Mr. Commissioner, this afternoon on questions from the Conservation Coalition, I objected to questioning on specifically slice, as it was used in the aquaculture industry and the marine environment. You allowed some questions on regulation of the aquaculture industry, and the witnesses answered that they not in fact know of whether or not pesticide use in the aquaculture industry was regulated by Environment Canada or DFO, and I just seek to clarify that answer.
Tell me what your question is.
Well, the question is, are they unaware of the fact that Health Canada in fact regulates pesticide use in the aquaculture industry, or are they just generally unaware of that regulation?
My position on this is that the re-examination is available to clear up something that's been left unclear. The questions were clear. They were posed with respect to DFO and Environment Canada. There was no answer given that Health Canada did or did not. It was just not asked at all. It's not appropriate re-examination. This client group will have 2 weeks this summer to get into all the issues they want to get into on aquaculture, and in my submission, it's not appropriate to get into that today.
With all due respect, Mr. Commissioner, we did not in fact seek to raise this issue today at all.
I'll allow you that one question, Mr. Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Pose it again to these two witnesses.
Absolutely. Our question is, are you also in fact unaware of the regulation of pesticide use by the aquaculture industry by Health Canada, or are you generally unaware of those regulations?
If I understand your question correctly, I believe I had stated that pesticide use in aquaculture was regulated by the PMRA, the Pesticide Management Regulatory Agency, which is an agency associated with Health Canada.
I apologize if I missed your answer, and thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner, for your discretion.
Mr. Commissioner, unless you have anything to ask these witnesses, I'm finished asking my questions of them.
Just one, I'm sorry, Ms. Baker, just one quick question. I just wanted to ask Dr. McDonald and Dr. Talbot, if you've mentioned throughout your testimony, obviously Environment Canada, DFO, and at times Health Canada. Is there any overarching body that you're aware of within Ottawa in any ministry that we've just spoken about here today that has an oversight or has some role to play in the collaborative nature of some of the topics that you discussed today?
Not that I'm aware of, Mr. Commissioner.
And I'm not aware of it either.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you both for appearing here today and for giving your answers to the questions asked by Council and for taking the time to bring your knowledge and information to the Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And our next panel will now come to the witness stand. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Our three witnesses we have this afternoon are Dr. Carey, closest to you, Ms. Walls in the center, and Dr. Paradis on the end closest to Council's table. If they could be sworn in, please.
I solemnly affirm that the evidence to be given by you to this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
May you speak up, please?
Yes.
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 State your name, please.
My name is John Carey.
My name is Lisa Walls.
Thank you.
Sylvain Paradis.
Thank you. Council.
Thank you. I'll start with Dr. Paradis, closest to me. If we could put his biography on the screen, it's tab 1. It's your CV. If you can just identify that as your CV.
Yes.
Okay, can I have that marked, please, as the next exhibit?
Exhibit 984.
Dr. Parody, you're currently with Health Canada, but from March 2006 to December 2010, you were the Director General of DFO Science Sector's Ecosystem Science Directorate.
Yes.
And from May 2003 until you took that position, you were the Director of DFO Science Sector's Environment and Biodiversity Directorate.
Yes.
Okay. As your CV indicates, you have a PhD in sociology.
Yes.
You have worked in Environment Canada or Health Canada since 1992 in various positions.
Yes.
And we'll get into quite a bit of what you did in your time at Fisheries and Oceans when we go through your evidence, so I'll leave that for there. If I could then move to Lisa Walls. Her CV is at tab 18. Ms. Walls, you're presently with Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, but prior to that you were the Associate Regional Director of, my name's right here. You were the Acting Director of Environmental Protection Operations and your Manager of Sector Support Section in Environment Canada, Pacific and Yukon region, is that right?
That's correct.
And you were there from either as Acting Director or I take it within a similar section, going back to the beginning of your career with Environment Canada, which began in 1991. You were the Acting Director of Environmental Protection from November 08 to March 09.
That's correct.
And prior to that, you were in various departments within Environment Canada going back to 1991.
That's correct.
Okay.
Actually going back to 1986.
Oh, 1986. Thank you. And while you were with Environment Canada, towards the end you were involved in interactions with Department of Fisheries and Oceans on various water quality issues.
Yes, through the 1990s and towards the end, I was involved with DFO on various water quality issues.
And Dr. Carey, oh, sorry, yes, could I have more of that mark, please? It's the next exhibit.
Exhibit 985.
Thank you. Dr. Carey's biography is in tab 17. And Dr. Carey, you have a PhD in inorganic phytochemistry.
Photochemistry, yes.
Photochemistry, sorry. You were a special advisor to the Assistant Deputy Minister of Science and Technology branch from January to July 2010, right?
That's correct.
And prior to that, you were the Director General Water Science and Technology Directorate. In fact, going back to 2005 with a brief hiatus when you were acting ADM. Is that right?
Yes, I became Director General of NWRI in 2003.
2003. Okay, thank you. All right, could I have that mark, please? This is the next exhibit.
Exhibit 986.
We've heard a bit today about Environment Canada's responsibility, and it's been often described as end of the pipe. We've also heard people talk about point and non-point source pollution. Can you tell us what the end of the pipe term refers to within the world of Environment Canada, as you understand it?
Sure. End of pipe is sort of a colloquial term that's used to describe the last point of control over a pollutant. So it's really, could be the end of the pipe, the end of the ditch, the end of the culvert, the end of the leachate, but it's the last point of control before it enters the receiving environment. And so in terms of Environment Canada and DFO's mandate with respect to Section 36 of the Fisheries Act, Environment Canada would focus our efforts on the pollutant discharge, controlling the pollutant discharge, or instruments to control the pollutant or prevent the deposit of the pollutant up until the last point of control or the end of the pipe where it entered the receiving environment. And then DFO's responsibility was generally to look at the effect of the pollutant on the fish. That's very much in a Fisheries Act context. If you look at the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, it provides for a life cycle approach to toxic chemicals mandate, which includes both the controlling of the pollutant at the source as well as development of environmental quality in the receiving environment, but on a toxic chemical specific basis.
Right. Is it fair to say that the primary focus for Environment Canada has been point source type discharges like mining and pulp and also specific toxics regulated under SEPA, as you've just described?
Well, my response is within the context of my responsibilities in a regional office for compliance promotion related to the Fisheries Act, Section 36 responsibilities. And in that context, I'd say that the focus was on regulated sectors, both regulated pursuant to the Fisheries Act as well as the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and those tended to be point sources of pollution, such as mining, pulp and paper, and associated environmental effects monitoring programs for those regulated sectors. Work related to non-point sources was more in where there were specific programs, such as the Georgia Basin Action Plan, which had a area of work related to non-point source pollution, specifically agricultural runoff and urban runoff. And the other area of focus for Environment Canada has and continues to be contaminated sites, and more specifically federal contaminated sites.
Compliance and promotion in your time with Environment Canada? Is that right?
Yes.
If you could put up Exhibit 693, this is a compliance and enforcement policy for habitat protection. This document is dated in November 2001. At page 3 of this document, there's a description there. I wonder if this is of assistance in understanding what is meant when you describe compliance promotion. And I'm looking at the third paragraph, which has 4 numbered bullets. Can you use that to explain what you were talking about when you talk about the compliance and promotion work that was done by Environment Canada?
Yes, I think that accurately describes in very broad terms the types of activities that are included in compliance promotion. The other area would be, or I guess, as part of related to technical assistance and public education as well, the development of guidance materials and codes of practice, and providing input in, both by Environment Canada or by other parties such as the provincial government. And compliance promotion activities would include providing advice and input to those guidance materials. So it's the development of the guidance materials as well as communicating and promoting them in a public education sense.
And was there a focus as to where that work was targeted? For example, was this compliance promotion also focused on the point source and regulated sectors, or did it have a different focus?
It was, we had compliance promotion related to all of the programs that we administered, that we were responsible for administering in the region and enforcing. And we like to refer to, the compliance and enforcement continuum. So compliance promotion is the front end work to try to encourage, promote, advise potential polluters to avoid the creation or deposit of a waste in the first place. And for any programs that the region administered, and specifically the ones I described earlier, compliance promotion was an important piece to avoid the deposit of the pollution in the first place. And then you would move to compliance verification, which is doing inspections to audit and assess whether or not those controls are effective. And then finally, investigation and enforcement, where there's a suspected violation of a applicable regulation. And I think it would be worth pointing out that with respect to Section 36 of the Fisheries Act, compliance promotion is a very important activity because of the fact that that is a general prohibition there are not specific, it's not like a specific regulation. SEPA is an enabling legislation, and so any regulatory instruments have to be introduced through regulations. There is no general prohibition component to it. The Fisheries Act has Section 36, which is a general prohibition against the deposit of a deleterious substance unless authorized by regulation. So in the absence of a regulation, it just says you can't deposit something that's deleterious to fish. So that requires a considerable amount of compliance promotion to enable understanding of what a deposit of a deleterious substance is and how to avoid it. Unlike where there's a specific regulation, they'll say, you know, this substance must be controlled in this way to this level, and you must report it in a certain way. It's very prescriptive typically, whereas 36, because Section 36, because it's a general prohibition, there is a fair bit of education and interpretation that's involved in enabling the public or industries or whomever to ensure that they comply.
So it is broader than simply the regulated sectors. It would be, compliance promotion would be much more broadly based than that. Is that what you're saying?
It was, so to answer your specific question, the compliance promotion efforts dealt with both the regulated sectors as well as under Section 30, general compliance promotion related to activities that could fall under the general rubric of Section 36 of the Fisheries Act.
So a much broader spectrum. You weren't just looking at pulp mills, for example. You were looking at anybody who could be a polluter into the environment?
It depends what point in time you're talking about, as you know, through you know, from around 2004 through to, you know, until I left the department. Actually, the efforts became much more targeted on the regulated sectors of point source discharges. But earlier on, we had programs that dealt with non-point source pollution.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. Is prior to 2004, it was a broad-based program?
Yes.
Okay. And doing that work, beginning before 2004, did Environment Canada work with DFO in the Pacific region to do the compliance and promotion work?
Yes, we collaborated and I guess worked in a coordinated fashion as set out in the principles of the 1985 MOU and the 1987 Regional Working Agreement.
All right. Did you work with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Water Quality Unit?
Yes, I did. My group did.
And was that work with the Water Quality Unit in relation to compliance and promotion?
Yes, it was. Yes, we worked together, and so our Environment Canada's role was basically to look at controlling the pollutant at source, recommending and advising on ways to control pollution at the source up until the point of deposit into the receiving environment, and then we would seek advice from DFO on appropriate or safe water quality, or the water quality unit on for presence and absence of fish species and type of fish species, as well as they would provide us advice on safe water quality thresholds for fish in a relevant sector or site-specific application.
And that's very helpful. Was there? How would you describe the water quality unit within DFO in the Pacific region in terms of working relationship with Environment Canada? Was it an important unit, and how was it used?
Well, it was a small unit, but it was a very effective means for us to coordinate, and it really served as a window into, it had a number of purposes. It served as a window into DFO for Environment Canada's environmental protection programs. So where we were dealing with compliance promotion on a site-specific or a sector-specific basis, we would work in collaboration with DFO through that group to get their advice and input on receiving water quality elements and aspects of whatever compliance promotion we were trying to do. And we would also have, generally we would have annual work planning meetings where we would share work plans and we would identify priorities and issues that we were respectively planning to work on. And that was a further opportunity to align and coordinate our activities so that we could support each other. And I guess the third area would be, the Fisheries Act, Section 35 deals with harmful alteration, disruption and destruction of fish habitat, and Section 36 deals with the deposit of deleterious substances or water quality. Quite often, if you're dealing with a site-specific development proposal, a contaminated site, or some kind of industrial sector, it has impacts in both areas. So we would work together to make sure that the advice we were providing was consistent. It made sense in a practical, from a practical implementation point of view, that you're protecting both water quality as well as habitat for fish. And so the water quality unit helped to provide that advice on the habitat impacts that was supportive with the work that we were doing on controlling pollution at the source.
Did Environment Canada and DFO work together addressing pollution limits, advising on pollution limits, or establishing best practices? Were those collaborative activities as well?
I would say they were coordinated activities. We're speaking very generally here. There was a number of different activities. At the time, we were receiving a lot of referrals from the province of BC on development of limits and conditions for provincial permits. So we would work together on our responses and provide recommendations on appropriate effluent discharge limits, operating conditions, and then DFO through the water quality unit would provide recommendations on safe water quality thresholds for fish or monitoring requirements in dealing with the receiving environment. If we were providing, developing things like codes of practice or best management practice, then we would collaborate with the water quality unit, and they would provide advice on the fish habitat and water quality, and we would develop the aspect dealing with controlling the pollution at the source. So we worked in a coordinated fashion.
Do you know, was the DFO water quality unit and its relationship to Environment Canada unique to the Pacific region?
I wasn't aware of a water quality unit existing in another region of DFO, but I can't say, I wasn't aware of it, but I can't say for sure that it was unique.
And I think you already touched on this, but is the DFO water quality unit still in existence?
No, it's not.
And it was in 2004 it was disbanded?
Yes.
Was Environment Canada, to your knowledge, consulted before the DFO water quality unit was disbanded?
No, I would not. I would say we were not consulted. We had a bit of a heads up, and we kind of heard that it might happen, but we were not consulted.
If I could ask you to look at tab 15, if that could be put up. This is a letter from Paul McGillivray to Don Fast. Paul McGillivray being with DFO, and Don Fast being with the Regional Director General for Environment Canada. This letter is dated July 9, 2004. Do you remember seeing this letter?
Yes, I do.
And this is the letter where Paul McGillivray advises Environment Canada that the water quality unit is being, disbanded, and that responsibility for various Section 36 activities will be done by Environment Canada in the future. What was that a very brief summary of your understanding of this letter?
Yes, I mean, it was basically informing us that, well, I won't read the letter, but yeah, I mean, the letter is basically saying that they were curtailing their activity in this area, and that they wanted to meet with us and talk about how we could continue, to fulfill, I guess, the overall objectives of 36 without the existence of that unit.
Were you involved in preparing a response to that letter?
Yes, it was.
Oh, I should mark that first letter as an exhibit. So this is the July 09.
987.
987?
That's correct.
Right, is that response that you prepared found at tab 12? It's a letter August 3, 2004, back to Paul McGilvery from Don Fast.
Yes, I was involved in drafting this letter.
Okay, well, just generally, before we get to the letter in any detail, what was the response within Environment Canada Regional to the news, or to the letter from Paul McGilvery?
We were surprised, and we, immediately started thinking about all the implications of this and wondering how we were going to adapt, and kind of surprised that they would do this, given that we did have a long-standing history of working together effectively through the Water Quality Unit, and we also saw it as, it was something that DFO had a responsibility under the Regional Working Agreement and the MOU of 1985 to continue to fulfill this role. So our response was we actually got together and internally and brainstormed a list of issues where we thought this could impact our work, and that led to this list of ECDFO Section 36 issues that you see on page 2 of the letter.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really, you can see it's kind of an assortment of high level and very specific things, and it really was just us sitting together and brainstorming all of the areas that we worked together and what we would need to talk about in response to this letter with DFO.
At that
And
time,
then a meeting was organized to talk about it.
at that time, was Environment Canada relying on the Fisheries and Oceans Water Quality Unit to provide it with science advice that it needed to do its work?
It was very much a coordinating unit, so they were, like I said, it was a small unit. I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 or 8 people. And so they weren't doing the science research themselves, but like I said, they were a window into the department, and they knew where to get the science. So if we had a specific question, and we had, regular things that we worked together on, such as contaminated sites, permit referrals, comments on development of code of practice, and various inquiries that we would get related to General Fisheries Act 36 activities that could be in potential non-compliance with Section 36 of the Fisheries Act. We would work together on those things, and sorry, what was the question?
Whether Environment Canada relied on science advice from DFO to address some of the issues.
Yeah, so we worked with that group there on the things that we received questions about all the time. We had that unit themselves would provide the information, but they also, like I said, were a coordinating function and a window into DFO so that they would know where to get the expertise and direct that to help respond to enable Environment Canada to respond in a fully, in a comprehensive manner to a Section 36 question.
And then bullet number 13 has a number of different files set out, contaminated sites, aquaculture, municipal wastewater, etc. Did Environment Canada at that time have the capacity in the region to take on the science advice previously provided by DFO to support those areas?
At the time, not the science advice that DFO provided. Like I said, previously Environment Canada's focus was on the regulated sectors, and we did have expertise in those sectors: pulp and paper, metal mining, both the effluent control as well as the receiving environment impacts. So we were able to pick up in those areas, but in these other areas at the time, we did rely on DFO to provide the water quality advice.
Okay, and was Environment Canada funded to do research and science work in water quality and receiving environments in those areas that are set out under bullet 13?
No.
All right, after the letter from Don Fast was written and delivered to Department of Fisheries and Oceans, was there a meeting between the two agencies to discuss those issues and what the implications were of the decision by DFO?
Yes, there was.
And you've provided me with some minutes of some meetings. If I could ask you to turn to tab 21. The first of these actually chronologically is tab 23, which is an email. Oh, sorry, yes, I do not have to mark it. Yes, sorry. The letter from Don Fath should be marked as the next exhibit.
It'd be 988.
Thank you. Sorry, back to tab 23, which is an email from you to a variety of people. Do you have that?
Sorry, which tab?
It's on the screen there.
Oh,
It's
okay.
from you to various people.
23. Yep.
All right, so this outlines action points from a February meeting.
Mhm.
Was February the first meeting that you had with Environment Canada and DFO together?
The February 16th meeting was the first meeting that we had to discuss this matter, yes.
Okay, sorry, these are a little bit out of order. If we turn to tab 28, that has the agenda from that meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll just start with that agenda then.
Mhm.
All right. And who was at this meeting?
The directors of the responsible units in Environment Canada and DFO, which is Mike Nazachuk, who was the regional director for environmental protection operations, and Sue Farlinger, who was the director of the Habitat division. I don't have the correct title, but director of Habitat at DFO in the region, as well as their managers that were responsible for this area of work, which was myself, Lisa Walls, and Bonnie Ancliffe, and some key staff as well.
All right, and what was discussed at that meeting? What was the plan?
Well, really, it was our first opportunity to talk about this change in DFO, so it was an initial sharing of information on changes that were going on in our respective departments that were affecting how we were organized to deliver our responsibilities with respect to Section 36 of the Fisheries Act. DFO explained the changes that they were undergoing with respect to their environmental process modernization initiative, which were part of the drivers for their decision to wind down the water quality unit. Environment Canada talked about some of the governance changes that we were embarking on through something called the Transformation Initiative and a CESF, Competitiveness and Environmental Sustainability Framework. So it was an initial meeting to kind of explain, update each other on the changes that were going on in our departments, and so, you know, for DFO it was an explanation of why they were winding down this unit, and for Environment Canada it was saying, well, you know, we've got some changes going on that are affecting our ability to continue to work in the same way in our department. And from there, we identified, again, some of the implications that would fall out of this, and there was an agreement to set up a working group or a steering committee to have further discussion on the specific areas that we were impacted and that we would need to find new ways of working together.
Right, and this meeting is in February, but the letter from Fisheries and Oceans was the previous July. So what happened in that long period of time between when you got the notice from DFO and when the first meeting happened?
You know, they it wasn't like they completely just stopped immediately. The people were still there. They were winding down. There was a smaller group that we could continue to work with. So in that interim period, we did to continue to work similar to what we had previously, because they had a water quality coordinator that continued on for about a year, I think, after that letter was issued, and some of the people were still there. So in that interim period, we sort of carried on.
Going back to tab 21, I think this is the next set of minutes. This is April 14, 2005. This was the follow-up meeting to the February one? Is that right?
Yep.
And what was the outcome of that meeting?
Well, one of the outcomes was that Environment Canada regionally set up something called the Fisheries Act Working Group. And the purpose of that was to better plan, coordinate, and identify priorities for our Section 36 Fisheries Act compliance promotion activities within Environment Canada. And we agreed that we would, share information on the activities of that group with DFO and try to get their input. There was an agreement that we would continue to track information that came in. We both received a lot of inquiries and requests for advice and information related to activities that might affect fish, and so we both agreed to track that work and to share information to try and get a sense on sort of what was the problem. There was a fear that with DFO closing down the water quality unit, that people that had previously gone to that group besides Environment Canada for advice would then all of a sudden start coming to Environment Canada. We wouldn't have the capacity to respond. So we started tracking those inquiries and tried to get a better handle on exactly the nature, the type, the number of inquiries and how they were coming in. And there was also an agreement to have some follow-up discussions with respect to contaminated sediment issues related to contaminated sites and what Environment Canada and DFO's respective roles and responsibilities would be with regard to that issue.
And if we look at page...
the action items are tracked. I'm going through them, but
Yeah.
those were the key ones. The other one was to develop a 2-page document that would describe in general terms what Fisheries Act 36(3) obligations are, so that we could use that document in kind of just a generic template way to respond to requests for advice and information. And so we agreed to develop that. Environment Canada agreed to develop that and to get DFO's input on that sheet.
Right, and if you see the heading action items, if you move 2 paragraphs ahead of that, up, higher up the page, it says DFO will continue to do contaminant science as it affects fish, but will move away from human health aspects. Environment Canada requests for research priorities should be directed to the water quality manager. That's a person within the water quality unit, is that right?
No, it was, it was a person within the water quality unit, although the water quality unit was being wound down, so there was a water quality manager position that continued on a short-term basis, and so that person was identified as the point of contact.
All right, but this paragraph that I was reading describes the process that was set up to keep the lines of communication going on science. Yeah. The lines of communication between Environment Canada and DFO on science requests was going to be handled in the manner set out in that paragraph. Requests would go from Environment Canada to the water quality manager.
Yeah, and this is very much in a regional context.
Right.
So this is in Pacific and Yukon region.
Right.
And as I said, the water quality unit served as our being Environment Canada environmental protection in Pacific and Yukon region. That was our window into DFO to get to share information on emerging issues, priorities, research requests, and water quality advice. So what this was saying is that there was one individual, the unit was wound down, but there was one individual identified to be the water quality manager, and they would continue to be our contact for this type of information. So it was shrinking from a unit to a person, and that person only existed for another 6 months or so. It was funding that disappeared, and that person was reassigned to other activities.
Thank you. Can I have
So that was the plan, but it didn't last for very long.
Thank you. Could I have those minutes marked as the next exhibit? And the last set of minutes are dated in October, and they're at tab 22. Is this the last? Well, first of all, was DFO at this meeting?
Yes.
Okay, and was this the last meeting that was held between Environment Canada and DFO to try and work through these issues?
Yes, it was the last, I guess, last of the steering committee meetings.
And was the outcome from this the development of a new relationship between and an understanding of who would have responsibility for what aspects in the Pacific region?
Well, in a number of these areas, I would say that the working relationship shifted from being coordinated through the Water Quality Unit to program-specific contacts. So, for instance, the contaminated site issue, there was a federal contaminated site action plan that started up, and Environment Canada and DFO and Health Canada continued to work cooperatively on under the fisheries, under the FCSAP, or Federal Contaminated Sites Action Program, dioxin monitoring. There were, people working in that area continued to work together. Permit referrals that actually. The frequency of permit referrals actually wound down because the province moved away from permitting individual discharges. There was work that continued on enforcement, so the enforcement people spoke to each other, and the Fisheries Act 36.3 fact sheet was developed. And the Fisheries Act Working Group continued until about 2006, and then that that activity ended. So I would say that for the most part, that work continued, but not, it was more program to program, scientist to scientist kind of contact.
Were there any of the gaps that were identified in the letter, which has now been marked? I have the exhibit reference down. 988. The gaps that were identified in that exhibit, have they been, are all of those gaps now addressed, or are there some that remain unresolved?
Can you refer me to the tab number again, please?
12.
I would say that, and this is at the time, so 2005, 2006, some of the items in bullet number 13, there was a bit of a gap in receiving water quality advice, as well as on Environment Canada's part. We were lacking a lead on Fisheries Act Section 36 issues, so that contributed to kind of a lack of focus on a number of these items listed in bullet number 13. With some exceptions, for instance, municipal wastewater continued to be a high level of activity, both on the science side as well as the compliance promotion and regulatory development side, led by Environment Canada. Environmental assessment, to the extent that the development proposals related to areas that Environment Canada had expertise, such as mining, that work I think continued effectively, because there was another program, contaminated sites, like I said, Federal Contaminated Site Action Program, and I'd say emergency response and investigations continued to be dealt with. The one that I would, the couple that I think where there was a gap at the time was on the aquaculture file, on miscellaneous, what I would call miscellaneous industries, or what's referred to here as miscellaneous industries. I think that that's the unregulated sectors, or they tended to be the small and medium-sized industries, SMEs. Fish processing was another area that there was reduced attention to and reduced coordination.
Okay. And what about coastal dioxin monitoring?
That was a very small program, and that was one where the DFO and Environment Canada scientists that were involved in the program continued to work one-on-one, and that program was actually in the process of winding down, because this was looking at monitoring dioxins and furans in shellfish, and to monitor the response to the implementation of the dioxin furan regulations, and the levels were coming down considerably as a result of changes in the pulp and paper industry, and they eventually that eliminated the need for that program to continue because the levels came down to safe levels.
For an environmental assessment, you touched on this a little bit, but would you say that the expertise for water quality and fish habitat is now properly coordinated between DFO and Environment Canada, or is that still a bit of a gray area?
Well, I'd say there's good coordination now because of changes under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. So it's clarified the coordination where there can be a bit of a gap is with respect to water quality advice. So DFO is very involved in environmental assessments, providing advice on fish habitat matters and fish species and populations and presence and what's required for protection of fish habitat. And Environment Canada provides advice on water quality. And again, that depends on having an expert that has experience and works with the relevant sector that the development pertains to. And again, mining is an example where we have where Environment Canada has an environmental effects monitoring program, so they have expertise to provide. If it's a sector that Environment Canada doesn't have a program in, then it can be harder to find the water quality expertise.
And the programs that Environment Canada does have in those different sectors would include what? Pulp, mining, and?
Mining, contaminated sites, shellfish under the Canadian Shellfish Protection Program. I'm not sure if I have the right terminology.
Sanitation.
Canadian Shellfish Sanitation Program. And environmental emergencies, Environment Canada has expertise. So Environment Canada has, with the Environmental Protection Program, has become much more focused on certain program areas.
Okay.
And the oil and gas sector as well is another one.
And any sectors where there's not a specific Environment Canada program, who's dealing with water quality? Which agency?
It would depend on, exactly what the development proposal is, and basically people would look and try and find somebody that had the expertise.
Which agency?
So it could be the provincial government, for instance.
What about pesticides? Who has responsibility for water quality impacts on pesticides?
That's the PMRA.
We were looking at the October minutes, and I haven't marked them yet as an exhibit, which I should do. Tab 22.
Tab 22.
Yeah. That's right.
Yep. Exhibit 991.
At the end of this meeting in October, the issues that you have identified here that we're just talking about, so the gaps, was a plan put in place to identify those gaps, or those gaps still remain?
Well, Environment Canada's response was to set up this Fisheries Act working group, and the working group set up basically a risk management framework using a set of criteria to evaluate all potential Fisheries Act Section 36 compliance issues that we dealt with in the region, and to prioritize them according to risk, and to try and focus our limited resources and expertise on the highest priority activities. So that was our effort to deal with those gaps, and then we tried to secure funding to address the highest priority issues.
So the gaps that we have been talking about, that you just identified, have they been resolved now, or are those gaps still there?
I haven't been with Environment Canada since March 2009, so I can't.
As of that
But
time.
as of that time, I would say that we haven't gotten into it here, but that because of organizational changes in Environment Canada, there was a lack of there was no departmental lead on Fisheries Act Section 36 compliance promotion specifically. So there was enforcement activity that there was a program for enforcement of and investigations of related to Fisheries Act Section 36, but there was no departmental lead or accountability or coordination on Section 36 of the Fisheries Act compliance promotion efforts. And as a result, there was still a bit of a, I would say, it wasn't a gap in that people weren't aware of the issues and people were sort of keeping a file on some of these issues, but there wasn't a concerted strategic effort to advance them. So some of the files were moving extremely slowly. And there was a lack of resourcing in the region for Fisheries Act Section 36 compliance promotion because of the organizational and governance changes.
Baker, we'll take a break. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hearing is now adjourned for the day and will resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
That's it.